I never thought I'd be the person standing in a county clerk's office, clutching a piece of paper like a lifeline, while watching my stepmother's face turn the color of sour milk. But life has a funny way of pushing you to the edge. For the last 2 years, this woman has tried to systematically erase my late mother's memory, culminating in a secret, backhanded plot to sell the one thing that meant everything to our family: my mom's pristine 50-acre organic farm. She thought she had found the perfect loophole, a way to cash out and leave me with nothing. But what she didn't realize was that my mother was always 3 steps ahead of anyone who tried to cross her. When the dust finally settled, my stepmother wasn't just stopped in her tracks. She was staring down the barrel of a legal nightmare that ruined her reputation and cost her everything she'd spent years manipulating my father to get. Was I wrong for letting her dig her own grave so publicly? Or would you have done the exact same thing to protect your family's legacy? To understand how we got to that explosive moment in the county building, you have to understand who my mother was and what that farm represented. My mom inherited those 50 acres from her own grandparents, and she poured her absolute soul into that soil. It wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was an active, thriving organic farm with a small orchard, a beautiful greenhouse, and a homestead that my parents built with their own hands when they were newlyweds. Growing up there, my childhood was filled with the scent of fresh lavender, rich earth, and the hum of tractor engines. My mother taught me how to cultivate crops, how to respect the land, and how to run a business, because the farm wasn't just a hobby. It provided a solid, steady income for our family through local farmers' markets and restaurant contracts. But when I was just 19, my world shattered. My mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and within less than a year, she was gone. On her deathbed, she held my hand and whispered that the farm would always be mine, that it was my birthright and my anchor in this world. My father was completely broken by her death, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. For the first year, he was a ghost, walking around the house in a daze while I stepped up, balancing my college classes with the grueling daily operations of keeping the farm afloat. I did it because I loved my mom, and I loved the land. But just 14 months after my mother passed away, my father met Brenda. Brenda was a real estate agent from the next town over, a woman who wore too much perfume, had a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and possessed an uncanny ability to figure out exactly how much money a person had within 5 minutes of meeting them. Looking back, I can see the red flags waving violently, but at the time, my father was lonely, vulnerable, and desperate for affection. Brenda swooped in like a vulture. Within 6 months of their first date, they were married, and Brenda moved into the farmhouse that my mother had lovingly decorated. The changes started almost immediately. Brenda didn't like the rustic look of the house, so she began throwing away my mother's antique furniture, replacing it with sterile, modern gray decor. She tried to pack up my mother's clothes and personal belongings while I was at school, and when I caught her and threw a fury-filled tantrum, she cried to my dad, claiming she was just trying to help us move on. My dad, completely under her spell, took her side, telling me I needed to respect my new stepmother. But Brenda's real target wasn't just the house, it was the land. She hated the dirt, she hated the smell of the compost, and she especially hated that I spent all my free time managing the crops instead of bowing down to her authority. She constantly complained about the wasted potential of the property, dropping hints about how much money developers would pay for 50 prime acres of land so close to the expanding highway. I constantly reminded both of them that the farm belonged to the family, but Brenda would just smirk and say that times change. My father became increasingly distant, completely blinded by Brenda's manipulation. She convinced him to cut off my funding for new farming equipment, forcing me to pay for seed and repairs out of my own pocket from the small savings account my mom had set up for me. It was exhausting, but I refused to give up. Then, 3 months ago, my father suffered a stroke. It wasn't fatal, thank goodness, but it left him cognitively impaired, requiring full-time rehabilitation in a specialized facility. Suddenly, Brenda was in complete control of his finances and his legal affairs through a power of attorney she had secretly made him sign months prior. With my dad unable to speak for himself, Brenda wasted no time. She looked at me with a chilling coldness and told me that my little farming project was over. 2 weeks after my dad was admitted to the rehab center, I came home from an early morning shift in the orchard to find a massive, shiny SUV parked in our driveway. A man in a tailored suit was walking the perimeter of our property with a clipboard, taking photos. When I approached him and asked what he was doing on my land, he looked confused and told me he was an inspector representing a major regional commercial developer. He said they were finalizing the preliminary evaluation for the purchase of the entire 50-acre parcel. My heart dropped into my stomach. I ran into the house, slamming the door, and confronted Brenda, who was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping espresso. She didn't even blink. She calmly informed me that as my father's legal representative, she had decided to sell the farm to a developer for a cool $1.2 million. She told me the closing was scheduled in less than a month, and that I had 30 days to pack up my belongings and vacate the premises. I screamed at her, calling her a thief and a monster, telling her that this was my mother's land and she had no right to touch it. Brenda just laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that makes my blood boil to this day. She told me that since my mother died without a public will, everything had legally passed to my father as her surviving spouse, and since my father was incapacitated, she held the keys to the castle. She told me I was nothing but a squatter living on her husband's property, and that no court in the land would take the word of a 22-year-old over a legally binding power of attorney. I left the house in tears, feeling completely defeated, sitting by my mother's favorite oak tree at the edge of the property, sobbing until my ribs ached. I felt like I had failed her. I felt like the legacy she worked her entire life to build was about to be paved over with concrete and strip malls. But as I sat there, wiping away my tears, a memory sparked in my mind. I remembered a conversation I had with my mother when I was 16, long before she ever got sick. We had been sitting at the kitchen table, and she was organizing a thick, worn leather binder full of old legal documents, deeds, and tax receipts. She had looked at me very seriously and said, "If anything ever happens to me, look inside the old cedar chest in the attic. There is a false bottom. What's inside there will protect you and this land forever." At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic about old family history, but in that moment of utter despair, those words echoed in my ears like a command. That night, I waited until Brenda took her sleeping pill and passed out. I crept up into the dusty, suffocating heat of the attic, using the flashlight on my phone to guide the way. It took me 20 minutes to find the old cedar chest, buried beneath boxes of Brenda's hideous holiday decorations. I emptied it out, my hands trembling, and pressed along the edges of the cedar floorboards. Sure enough, with a satisfying click, a wooden panel popped up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a yellowed, heavy paper envelope sealed with wax. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. Inside was a certified, fully notarized copy of a document from our county records office, dated 2 years before my mother passed away. It wasn't a standard will. It was a transfer on death deed, along with an irrevocable agricultural conservation easement. As I read through the legal language, tears of absolute relief started pouring down my face. My mother, knowing how volatile life could be and perhaps sensing her own mortality or my father's financial weakness, had legally recorded a deed that explicitly stated the ownership of the 50-acre farm would automatically and immediately transfer directly to me upon her death, completely bypassing probate and bypassing her spouse. Furthermore, the conservation easement strictly prohibited the land from ever being subdivided or used for any commercial or residential development in perpetuity. It was an ironclad legal fortress. But then a terrifying realization hit me. If this document existed, why didn't the estate lawyer find it when she died? Why was the title still showing in my father's name on the basic online county property search? The next morning, I bypassed Brenda entirely and drove straight to the county records and deeds office downtown. I needed answers, and I needed them fast, because the clock was ticking down to Brenda's scheduled closing date. I met with a senior clerk named Martha, a wonderful, sharp-eyed woman who had worked for the county for 30 years. I handed her the document from the cedar chest. Martha adjusted her glasses, typed vigorously into her computer system for what felt like an eternity, and then let out a long, low whistle. She looked up at me and explained that due to a massive county database migration, and a clerical indexing error 22 years ago. The deed had been filed under a slightly misspelled variation of my mother's maiden name, causing it to be hidden from basic digital title searches. It was a freak administrative glitch, but the physical, stamped microfilm record and the notarized document in my hand were 100% valid, legal, and active. The land had legally been mine the exact second my mother drew her last breath. My father never owned it after her death, which meant Brenda's power of attorney meant absolutely nothing in regards to the farm. Martha looked at me with a mischievous grin and said, "Honey, whoever's trying to sell this property is in for a very rude awakening. Do you want me to formally correct the digital indexing error and print out the certified title updates right now?" I told her yes, but then a thought occurred to me. Brenda had been incredibly cruel, arrogant, and ruthless. If I told her right now, she would just find another way to manipulate the situation or try to tie me up in court with my dad's money. I wanted her to feel the exact desperation she had inflicted on me. I wanted her to face the consequences of her greed in the most definitive way possible. So that is the exact situation I found myself in, holding the ultimate legal weapon while my stepmother remained completely oblivious, blindly marching toward a massive payday. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that unfolded on the day of the scheduled closing, I want you to take a second, pause, and drop a comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted her immediately to get her out of your house, or would you have waited for the trap to spring just like I did? I decided to play the long game. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the defeated, grieving child perfectly. I started packing up my bedroom into cardboard boxes, purposely leaving them in the hallway where Brenda could see them. Every time she walked past me, she had this insufferable, triumphant smirk on her face. She even had the audacity to tell me that she was doing me a favor by forcing me to get a real job in the city instead of playing in the dirt. I stayed quiet. I nodded, kept my eyes on the floor, and let her believe she had won completely. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was coordinating directly with Martha at the county records office and a prominent local real estate attorney I hired using the last of my savings. My attorney told me to let the closing proceed to the final signing, because the moment Brenda attempted to sign a contract for a property she didn't own, using an invalid authority, she would be committing multiple layers of fraud. The day of the closing arrived. Brenda woke up early, dressed in a sharp, expensive designer suit, looking like a woman who was about to inherit the earth. She didn't even say goodbye to me as she walked out the door, merely yelling through the house that the movers would be there at the end of the week. The closing was taking place at a prestigious title company office downtown. I gave her a 30-minute head start. Then I put on my best clothes, grabbed my folder containing the certified county records, and drove down there with my attorney. When we walked into the conference room, the scene was picture perfect. Brenda was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by her personal real estate agent and the representative from the commercial development firm. There were stacks of legal documents spread out before them, and Brenda was holding a fancy pen, ready to sign away my mother's life's work. When I opened the door and walked in, Brenda's face twisted into an expression of pure rage. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table, and screamed at me, telling me I had no right to be there, that I was embarrassing myself, and that security would escort me out. The development representative looked incredibly uncomfortable and asked what was going on. My attorney calmly stepped forward, pulled out a chair for me, and told everyone to take a breath. He looked directly at the title company officer who was presiding over the closing and said, "Before anyone signs anything today, we need to address a critical issue regarding the title of the property located at 412 Old Maple Lane. The seller listed on these documents does not have the legal authority to convey this land." Brenda let out a screeching laugh, shouting that she had a fully executed power of attorney for her husband, who inherited the land from his late wife. She accused me of being a bitter, delusional child who couldn't accept reality. That's when I opened my folder. I took out the fresh, certified deeds and title prints that Martha had prepared for me, bearing the official embossed gold seal of the county records office. I slid them across the mahogany table directly to the title officer. I looked Brenda dead in the eyes, my voice completely steady, and said, "My father never inherited this farm, Brenda. My mother left it to me through a transfer on death deed recorded years ago. The county records were updated and corrected 2 weeks ago. The legal owner of that farm is me, and me alone. And even if I wanted to sell it to you," I added, turning to the shocked developer, "my mother placed an absolute, perpetual conservation easement on the land. It can never be developed, it can never be subdivided, and it can never be zoned for anything other than organic agriculture. This entire deal is dead." The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. The title officer picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the county seals and the legal descriptions. His face went pale. He looked up, looked at Brenda, and then looked at the developer. He slowly pushed his chair back and said, "He's right. The title is clear, and it's registered in the name of the son. The power of attorney is completely invalid for this transaction because the husband never owned the property post-mortem. Furthermore, the conservation easement completely nullifies the buyer's intended use for the land. This closing is officially terminated." What happened next was pure, unadulterated chaos. The developer jumped out of his seat, completely furious, and began screaming at Brenda, accusing her of wasting their time, misrepresenting the property, and committing fraud. He yelled that his company had spent tens of thousands of dollars on surveys and environmental impacts based on her assurances that the title was clean. Brenda was trembling, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her expensive pen. She looked at the documents, then at me, her face completely drained of color. She tried to stammer out an excuse, claiming she didn't know, but the damage was done. The developer stormed out of the room, threatening a massive lawsuit for breach of contract and misrepresentation. When everyone had cleared out, it was just me, my attorney, and Brenda left in the room. She turned on me, her eyes filled with pure venom, and hissed that I had ruined her life, that she was my father's wife, and that she would make sure I never saw a dime of my dad's estate. I just smiled, stood up, and told her that she had until midnight to pack her bags and get out of my mother's house, or I would have the sheriff remove her for trespassing. The aftermath was incredibly satisfying. Brenda packed her things that very night, sobbing and cursing my name the entire time. Because she had pulled my father out of his original facility to save money for her own lifestyle, I was able to use the legal clarity of my ownership to step in as his medical proxy, proving to a judge that Brenda was acting against his best interests for financial gain. The court revoked her power of attorney, and I was able to move my dad to a beautiful, top-tier care facility right down the road from the farm, where he is currently receiving the best rehabilitation possible. His mind is slowly clearing, and during my last visit, he held my hand and whispered that he was sorry for letting her blind him. As for Brenda, her real estate career is completely dead in our county. Word spreads fast in small towns, and after the stunt she pulled with the developer, no reputable firm would touch her. She tried to sue me for emotional distress and a share of the farm's value, but the judge threw the case out within 5 minutes and ordered her to pay my legal fees. She is currently living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment 2 towns over, buried under debt from the legal fees and the threats of lawsuits from the development company. This entire experience taught me that the truth always has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it's buried under clerical errors or human greed. My mother loved that land, and she loved me enough to protect us both from beyond the grave. Standing in those fields now, watching the sunset over the orchard, I feel a sense of peace I haven't felt since she passed away. The farm is safe. It will remain a farm forever, and nobody will ever try to take it away from me again. If you think I did the right thing by letting Brenda walk right into her own trap, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of sweet, well-deserved justice, and definitely share your final thoughts on this whole crazy mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.